So there's a word that's coming up for me again and again that's actually, it's actually related to the conversation I was expecting to have. So I'm like seeing a connection there between what's emerging here and sort of my expectations for this conversation, and what was sort of alive for me in the days leading up to this conversation. And the word is idolatry. And there was something you said like these emergent communities are doing Christianity better than Christianity is doing Christianity, which was just like, I want to be careful because there's like a hubris in that, and there's a way of hearing that sounds really off. There's also an experience I've had that speaks to that, experiences I've had that speaks to the truth of that. But the question is, what is Christianity doing that's making it do Christianity poorly? What is it that time and again organized communities fall prey to that brings them out of alignment with the logos? And it's the perennial problem of idolatry. And there was something Jordan Hall said in his conversation with John Vervaeke, one of the two most recent conversations, I don't remember which, and I was already thinking it before he said it explicitly. And he said, narrative is idolatry. But here's the tricky thing, is that you can make an idol out of this dialogos thing as well. You can make an idol out of the conversational artistry that you're engaged in. And it was like you were talking about how you almost started to do that with this meta-practitioner label. It was like, this is a thing I am, and it became too fixed of a thing, and you were too attached to it. And there's something about the label of conversational artist that has there's more humility in it, and there's more of a sense for whatever reason, and this could be, this could vary from person to person, but for whatever reason for you were less prone to idolatrize that term, conversational artist, over the term meta-practitioner. And I think you have to be aware of that, that anything can be turned into an idol, including God himself.
Just letting that nuclear bombshell land. Holy shit.
So this is,
that is so just just for me, especially with my whole 4-year track on delving into Islam and the kind of cultural binary there, the metaphysical, theological binary is always running between monotheism and polytheism. Polytheism being very strongly associated with idolatry, making an idol other than God.
Mm-hmm.
And so this notion that God can become idol is just like devastating to that whole that whole bedrock of a lot of people's psychospiritual stability, I guess, is resting upon this clear-cut division. And what we're doing is like, we're really blurring the lines a little bit when we say, okay, an idol is that which deviates from God. And maybe we can get into what God is if we've got a few million years to talk. But God can become an idol as well.
That's why God has to die in Christianity, maybe. God himself has to die and be reborn, because God is taking part in that. The thing about the issue with idolatry is it's taking something and
very interesting,
fixing it and saying this is eternal and will never die.
So when you said God has to die in Christianity, my first thought was the death of God, as in, what Nietzsche articulates in the 19th century, the last 400, however long timeline, but the sort of late stage death of God. But then you made this move where it was like, actually, Christ, embodied immanent God, has to die on the cross. And that somehow is also showing it's like a non-eternality of that God, I guess, in a way, for that God to die. And this is giving me a sense that like the fixedness of the notion of eternity or of God in relationship to eternity itself becomes a limitation on the potentiality of that, compared to a genuine felt state of no thingness, which you might drop into, or my favorite phrase from Terence McKenna, the primacy of experience. So this is beautiful because we're like pirouetting in and out of the thing that I was trying to synthesize under the metapractitioner, which is like, okay, so Zach talks about trans narrative becoming a trans narrative, trans paradigmatic being, a kind of shamanic individual who can move between culture tribes and political tribes and metaphysical tribes without being totally off them, and who can switch, I can switch between different narrative structures. But then there's this other move that's the move away from narrative altogether. Right? This is the admission that narrative itself becomes the idol that we're holding on to. Like the idol is like, something that you can kind of clasp and hold up in the air and wave to everybody else. Like, I've got the thing. It's right here. It's this golden calf. It's this altar piece. It's this, this prophet, whatever it is. There's a move from that narrative idolatry to the non-narrative, the state which cannot be encapsulated in narrative, which I'm going to call direct experience. And so the metapractitioner, as I would propose, he or they, she, whatever to be, is not only transnarrative in a shamanic sense, but also periodically in dialectic between experience and narrative.
Yes.
Experience being that which it cannot be encapsulated within narrative. So I go into direct experience. Hopefully I can achieve that through my day-to-day sobriety, but with a more rigid mind, it might require LSD or something of that nature to initially encounter what is meant by the primacy of direct experience. The sort of rich, ego-dissolving, ever-expanding territory that we walk through every day without perceiving. But then we can't dwell there forever because we're not gods. We live in a somewhat material landscape that we have to move through. And we have this like whole thing going back to sitting around the campfire, beginning with song, and from song perhaps moving then into story, and from story into written text, and from written text into Abraham and Ibrahim, and Jesus being a kind of revolutionary counter movement inside of that, I guess. Christianity being like a perpetual revolutionary state within the Judeo-Christian lineage. And then the death of that narrative after 2,000 years, roughly. And then the arrival at the state of, oh, there's a multiplicity of narratives now, right? We've gone postmodern. There's Christianity, but there's also Islam and Buddhism and left and right and a woman's perspective and a man's perspective. And yet somehow there's like a lack of, like there's a fragmentation in that, and there's a lack of center of, like there's a certain relativism which seems to give rise to like dishonesty, or lack of relationship to direct experience, because I can adopt the postmodern understanding and articulate it very well without really understanding my own life, what I've actually experienced, or going through the phases of development. So we're sitting on the cusp of that. We highly developed primates are sitting on the cusp of that whole process. And we've broken out of the chains of the expert authority relationship, at least for now. And are bringing back something far more archaic of the circle, of the campfire circle, right? So what this is what we're doing right now. I'm going to talk to John. John is an expert, and he's earned his teacherly authority. But if I'm being truthfully integrated with the metaphysical interrelationship understanding that we're getting at, this conversation is totally in dialogue with that. It's of exactly the same importance.
I don't know how I feel about that.
Whereas my monologue left you.
What was that?
Whereas my monologue left us.
Ooh, the death of God, it was interesting. The way you said it was exactly, you drew the connection between Nietzsche pronouncing the death of God and the death of God in Christianity, in the Passion story. And it was the exact same connection I've been thinking about, and that I wanted to get to when I was talking to Paul. But we just didn't have the time to develop that conversation. And there was something else you said about the dialectic between narrative and experience. I've been sort of thinking about it as the dialectic between narrative and dialectic.
Mm-hmm.
So that you're not making an idol out of either one. You can make a narrative out of, you can make an idol out of narrative, but you can also make an idol out of dialectic if it stultifies at the, if it stultifies at the propositional level. At least that's sort of how I've seen idolatry taking form, is you frame it propositionally and you say, look, I found the thing. This is, this is the thing we've all been looking for. Come, join me, follow me, follow this thing. But you're not actually practicing what it is you're holding up as the thing to be practicing. And this is why Christianity can be bad at doing Christianity, because
Beautiful thread.
being let's see. There's something so profound about the idea that God dies in Christianity. It's like a gesture of this is it's like the God is the real God is in the process of following what God does in the Christian story, which is to die and be reborn.